So in this video, I'm going to be going over some of the structures of the heart, and I'm going to talk about the pathway of blood flow through the heart as well. So when you look at the heart, there are actually four major chambers to the heart. So we have two chambers toward the superior aspect of the heart that are receiving chambers, which means they receive blood, and those are called the atrium. Okay, so over here we have the right atrium. And then up here we have the left atrium. So those are the receiving chambers. Those are the chambers that receive blood either from the body or from the lungs. Right? Now the two larger chambers towards the inferior aspect of the heart are called ventricles. So here we have the right ventricle. And over here we have the left ventricle. Now just a helpful hint whenever you're looking at a heart, whether it be a picture or whether it be an actual dissected heart, one way that you can tell the left side from the right side is if you look at the ventricles. Okay, the left ventricle always has a much thicker myocardial wall. Okay, this muscle wall here is always a lot thicker in the left ventricle than it is in the right ventricle. You can see it's pretty thin here. Now the reason for that is the left ventricle actually pumps blood out to the body, right, to the entire body. And so it has to have a lot more force because it's taking the blood a much further distance. Whereas the right ventricle is only pumping blood to the lungs, okay, which are pretty close by to the heart. So it doesn't need to, build up as much force because the blood doesn't need to travel as far. So that, muscle wall is a lot thinner and less substantial in the right ventricle than in the left ventricle. So that's just one way that you can tell those two apart when you're doing your heart dissection. Okay. Now we have two septums that separate the atriums and the ventricles from one another. So you can't really see the septum that's separating the right and left atrium, but we do have the interventricular septum showing here. And that obviously separates the right and left ventricles from one another and keeps them distinguished from one another. Now you also notice that there are structures separating the atrium and the ventricles, and then also separating the ventricles from the major vessels that carry blood out of the heart. Okay, so there are two structures or valves that separate the atrium from the ventricle on each side of the heart. And those valves are called the AV valves. Okay, so we have the right AV valve here, this valve right here. Also known as the tricuspid valve. And then on this side we have the left AV valve, also known as the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Right. And so these valves are important because they separate blood found in the atrium from the ventricle. They keep those structures separated. And I'll talk more about those when we get into the pathway of blood flow through the heart. I'll get into more detail about, why those are so important to separate those structures. The next type of valves that we see are semilunar valves. Okay. And so the first semilunar valve is right here in the right side of the heart. This is the pulmonary semilunar valve. And then here on the left side of the heart, we have the aortic semilunar valve. Right. So the pulmonary semilunar valve essentially separates the right ventricle from this major structure carrying blood away from the heart here, called the pulmonary trunk. All right. The aortic semilunar valve separates the left ventricle from the major vessel carrying blood away from the heart on that side, and it's called the aorta. And that's actually the largest vessel found within the body. Okay. All right, so I'm going to clear all of this, and I'm going to get into the pathway of blood flow through the heart now. So I'm going to just clear all this. All right, so let's talk about pathway of blood flow through the heart. So as blood is traveling through the heart, through the body, there are actually two different pathways of circulation of blood. Okay, we have what's called systemic circulation, and we have what's called pulmonary circulation. So let me just jot these terms down here. So systemic circulation is just referring to the pathway of blood flow from the heart to all of the tissues of the body to allow that blood to drop off oxygen to all of our tissues. Okay, you need oxygen in all of your cells to keep them alive, to help them produce ATP. And so the purpose of pumping this blood throughout the body, the major purpose really is to carry oxygen to those cells to keep them alive. Okay, and so that happens through systemic circulation. So as it travels to those body tissues, it's taking oxygen to the tissues, it's dropping oxygen off, and then it's picking up the waste product, carbon dioxide, and bringing that back to the heart. Okay, so that's the whole process of systemic circulation. In pulmonary circulation, this is referring to the pathway of blood flow from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. Okay, because what are we doing in the lungs? We're picking up oxygen, that oxygen that we just dropped off at the rest of the body. So in pulmonary circulation, we're going to be sending blood that has lost oxygen, deoxygenated blood that's been carried back from the body. We're going to send that blood to the lungs to pick up more oxygen and to also drop off that carbon dioxide waste that was just picked up throughout the body, right? So we pick up oxygen, drop off carbon dioxide, and then that blood travels back to the heart. Okay, so that's pulmonary circulation. So let's talk about how this is happening, in the heart. So let's start off with, say that the blood has already dropped off oxygen in all of the tissues of the body, and it's making its way back to the heart. So this is deoxygenated blood. So I'm going to draw these arrows in blue just to show you that this blood is deoxygenated. It has lost oxygen, and it's coming back to the heart. All right. So deoxygenated blood is going to travel to the heart via two vessels, and those are the superior vena cava up here. Right. So it's coming in the superior vena cava, and then the inferior vena cava below. So blood is going to be coming into the heart through both of those vessels. Let me see if I can blow these arrows up, make them a little bit easier to see. Right. So blood's coming in through the superior and inferior vena cava into the receiving chamber, which we just said before is the right atrium. Okay, so that blood is coming into the right atrium here. And once that blood travels into the right atrium, the next place that it's going to go is through this valve that we mentioned earlier called the right AV valve. So this valve will open up and that blood will pour from the right atrium into the right ventricle, right, which is here. Okay, so that right AV valve opens up, blood travels from the right atrium into the right ventricle. The next thing that's going to happen is the heart will beat. Okay, it's going to pump, and all this muscle down here on the bottom will contract. And when it contracts, it's going to push this blood that's in the right ventricle up and out of this valve, which we said before is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, so when all that pressure forces this blood up against this valve, you can see that it's going to push this valve open, and it's going to allow that blood to leave out of the pulmonary trunk, okay? And the pulmonary trunk branches into two major arteries called the left and right pulmonary arteries. So the left pulmonary artery is going to be carrying this blood to the left lung, and then the right pulmonary artery is going to be carrying blood to the right lung. And so as that blood travels to the lungs, it's going to be picking up oxygen, dropping off carbon dioxide. So now this blood is oxygenated. It has lots of oxygen. So this blood is going to get carried back to the heart so it can be pumped out to the body. Okay? And that blood is going to travel into the heart via the left and right pulmonary veins. Okay? So we have the left pulmonary veins here and the right pulmonary veins here, which I know you can't really see that well in this picture, but both of these sets of veins actually carry blood into the left atrium. Okay, this little vessel, I just put the little asterisk in. So it's receiving blood from the lungs. Okay. Then the left atrium will slightly contract. That pushes blood through the left AV valve, this valve here, into the left ventricle. Okay. And as that blood enters the left ventricle, the heart will contract again to pump that blood out of the left ventricle through this semilunar valve, which is called the aortic semilunar valve, into the aorta, and the aorta will carry that blood all throughout the body in every direction that it needs to go to all of those tissues. It'll drop off oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide, and then all of that deoxygenated blood will come right back to where we started, back into the superior and inferior vena cava. All right, and the whole thing will start all over again. All right. So if you guys have any issues with this, please let me know. There are a couple more videos that I'll put on here with some moving images and things like that that might help you out a little bit more. But I wanted to kind of give you a brief overview myself. So again, just let me know if you guys have any issues.